Okay, so with this one, we're just going to use the pen. And so here we go. It just starts off with coming down from the bottom of the tile. And it's a line that comes up, have a little top piece, and then just kind of echo that line coming back down. So it's as if that's a stem, and then we have the leaf coming up like that. So some of them can be a little taller, maybe a little curve to it. But you have that same shape, it's sort of like a spade on cards. Come back down the top a little bit. So you could have one like this. And maybe if I have another one coming up here, a little taller. And then if I have a taller stem like this, I can always maybe I'll have it come up this. I've never tried a double loop like that. And hey, why not? Come up, back down, and maybe just to fill this in a little bit more. I have another one there. Whoop, come back here. Okay. So why don't you go ahead with something like that? So it's somewhat filled in like so. Okay, so once you grab another tile, and with this one, we're going to work with that same tangle. It's called poke leaf from the poke weed plant. We did poke root earlier. Those sort of almost looked a little bit more like a cherry. But we want to play with the idea of perspective. So if there was a big one in the foreground, my pen's fading a little bit here, that gives us the idea that this is bigger, whereas if we have just sort of a teeny little one in the distance, it starts giving us a sense of depth. So, there could be coming up from here, like here's the top of another one. So curve around, come off my tile, maybe come up like that, back down around. So we always want to do the ones that are going to be in the foreground. So say if back here, we know that this one comes like this. I sort of did that out of order a little bit. But again, we have, big, smaller, smallest, another one back here. And maybe be even a little bit smaller. So the original, maybe right here, comes up like this. So when we think of some of the earlier art, some of the Egyptian art or Greek and Roman art, it was very flat. The artists, the creators hadn't figured out perspective yet. And it was during the Renaissance when they really figured out, perspective like this, where if we have the same object, but begin to alter the shape, the overall size of it, gives the illusion of depth, because that's what we're after here. It's all about creating an illusion, and maybe coming in behind here. That would come like that, and then it would come down behind there. So everything, anything smaller comes out from behind. It's kind of for trying to create that perspective. And then do a teeny one. So anyway, you can kind of, fill this in a little bit. But it would just give you another tile to experiment with the watercolors, which we'll get into next. Okay, so how many people have used these before? Used watercolors? So a few? Okay, it's fine if you have. It's fine if you haven't. I just want to show you a couple of things to get you going. I mean, feel free to just dive in if you want to experiment. And I just realized... Oops. Just one thing to notice here is when you get your brush out, there's that little plastic cap. And since we want to keep our tools in good shape, what I usually do is take that cap and put it back just in the little edge, the edge of my case, so I can make sure I have it. Because when we're done, you'll want to pretty much dry off the brush and then put it back in there, just so you can protect your brush and get a long life out of it. So what I'm going to do is just, I get my brush wet, and I found sometimes with the watercolors, here, let me just move this, just when I'm starting off, say if I'm going to go with red, I'll get my brush pretty wet, just sort of to activate the paint. I sometimes need to get a little extra on there. And then I can just come down and, you can do what you want, but say if I want to just do these leaves different colors, and it's called watercolor because we're working with water, and for me, I just sort of love the variation I'm getting. If I bring my brush back up here and go to where there's a little drier segment of the paint, I can get a richer color. So it's sort of, I don't know, it's a little bit of math, I guess, that how much the paint is diluted affects the the intensity of the color. And then this is just, I think is amazing about watercolor. I can just take my brush, kind of zip it around in my water, and it just cleans it out. So you can do a lot of painting without having to change your water. So again, my brush is pretty red. I'm just going to activate another color here. I'm going to go after my orange. And so I'll just come in. But just as, as we talked about, this Zentangle paper is beautiful, high quality paper, and I think the watercolor looks really nice on it. And so you can use the just the paper towel that, say if you're trying something, say I'm going with my pink and it's coming out too heavy or there's sort of too much water on there, I can just dab the paper towel and take some of that water off. Go back to my pink if I want to kind of accentuate that color. Although, as I mentioned, sometimes having that little bubble of water on there. Now, I know last class we started with clay, and we will get to that, but I just wanted to, before we go to the museum, because we'll see many different types of art there, I wanted you to have a little experience with the clay, and then now with the watercolors. So depending on your experience with them, or even just after today's class, maybe have more appreciation for what we'll see there. Okay, so if you all wouldn't mind if you can reach a stopping point and just break for just a moment. Clearly I haven't filled everything in, but I just wanted to show you this other idea, this other technique that, again, what I enjoy about the watercolor is how they can be imprecise. And so I just have a fair amount of red on my brush, and I'm just going to come across like this, and maybe, if I get a little water on there, I might start smearing some of the colors in the background. And so if I was thinking of sort of having maybe a sunset, so I have red at the bottom, which is the deepest. Then I'm going to come in with my orange. You can maybe see some of the colors are kind of blending together or playing off of each other. And then maybe above the orange, there'll be a little bit of pink coming through. Again, I can experiment with putting more water on my brush and see. It's called a wash, like a watercolor wash. And then maybe at the very top of the sunset, I'm getting some gradations, getting a little yellow in there. So you might like the precision of just having some of your leaves filled in, but I wanted to just suggest that sometimes you can play around with it. And actually, maybe I'm going to go with this purple. So maybe at the base of the sunset, there's kind of some purple right there. Then if I get my brush wet and sort of go in between the colors, it kind of blends it more together the way a sunset isn't just absolute lines. So I just invite you to keep experimenting with what you have. And if you feel like you've sort of made some progress with your first tile, and you like how it looks, we do have the second one there. And feel free to play around with, I don't know what you've done, I don't want to. I had, with my first one there, I didn't really work with the stems at all, but if I wanted to go with, say, green for the stems, I could play with that. When we talk about creating the illusion of depth, maybe you've encountered this in other art classes, there's atmospheric depth. So what that means is if you're looking at a cityscape and in the distance things they're less, if it's a little bit of a cloudy or there's kind of a foggy day or something, the things in the distance get a little more faint and aren't as distinct. So if you played with that, say I'm working with green for this big stem that's very close to me in green, then I could do, using the same green but a little more diluted with less water, if I did one of the stems that's more in the distance, and if that green was lighter, a lighter green, it would help with that aspect of that atmospheric perspective. So this is just, a lot to experiment with here, a lot to play with. And as I mentioned about my experience of doing that origami, I hope that we're getting towards a pretty busy time in this semester. Rather, this can hopefully be a little bit of a a break for you. So you can keep going. I'm just sort of going to clean up because I just want to show you a couple more things. But as I mentioned, when you're done, you can just rinse your brush thoroughly, dry it off somewhat on your paper towel, and then I'm just carefully putting it back into the plastic end cap there.